Vicky Ward's new book, Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption, just came out. She dropped by the program to discuss it. Check it out. You'll find it fascinating. And don't forget to leave your comments, ding the bell, and subscribe to our channel. Online with us right now is Vicky Ward, the editor-at-large of the Huffington Post, author of the new book, Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption, which is one of our book reports for the day. And VickyWard.com is her website. You can tweet her at VickyPJWard. And Vicky, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom.
It's a pleasure having you. I love the book. Now I've got a copy of the book. We talked last week, and I didn't have a copy of the book at the time. And it's just a breathtaking story. I mean, in fact, I haven't read the entire book, but the part that I have read, you kind of mentioned in passing that Kushner's daddy made a huge donation to Harvard to get him into college. And of course, we know his father, went down in flames. He was convicted of all kinds of financial crimes. To what extent has Jared followed in his father's footsteps as essentially a grifter, a hustler, and a criminal?
Oh, my goodness. That is the question.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, this book is really all about fathers' relationships with their adult children. And, I think really one of the main themes here is how Charlie Kushner still really controls Jared.
Charlie Kushner being his father.
Yes, so that everything Jared Kushner does, even from inside the White House and certainly when it comes to foreign policy, is all really steered by his father and by his father's financial needs. You have to remember, so if you go back in time, that Charlie Kushner always raised Jared to be the heir, and that Charlie Kushner had these extraordinary ambitions. He wanted the Kushners to be the Jewish Kennedys. He made a lot of money very quickly in the real estate business in New Jersey, but then he spent that money on courting politicians. He clearly wanted a much grander, more powerful platform. But he started to cut corners because he does have this belief that rules really are for other people. And you have to remember that his own parents had had a horrific experience in the Holocaust. And there is, you can understand that if they had been done what they'd been told to do back in Poland, they'd be dead. So there is a mentality that rules are dangerous. And Charlie Kushner certainly believed, I spoke to one of the Kushner family members, he wasn't going to sit around and wait and see if Jared got into Harvard by himself. He was going to make sure that check got written. And in fact, I point out in the book, one of the checks for $1 million wasn't even from him. It was from the Kushner companies. But, this mentality, rules are for other people, which is why he then steals effectively from his siblings to pay for all these politicians, including Bibi Netanyahu, to come give speeches in his hometown in New Jersey. And this is then what sparks all the trouble that he then gets into, because the feds, then led by Chris Christie, then the U.S. attorney in New Jersey, get wind of what had started out as a civil family dispute. His brother sued him for basically stealing from him. The whole thing blows up, and Charlie, once he realizes the feds and Christie know things about his private life that he really wishes they didn't, and that Christie is threatening to air in a public courtroom, that is when Charlie snaps and basically hires a prostitute and sets up his own brother-in-law in a sting. He films the encounter with a prostitute and sends it to his sister. Well, that's one of the reasons also that he has to plead guilty, because he couldn't stand in front of a jury after that and tell them what a good person he was. But what's so fascinating is the impact on Jared. Jared doesn't think that what happened to his father is the sort of right and natural consequences of breaking the law. Jared thinks that Chris Christie had no business getting involved in what was essentially a family dispute. And that is why many years later, Jared took very little time in firing Chris Christie from the transition and ripping up all the work that had been done on the transition. Jared's mentality is all about, after that, how do I avenge my father? How do I rehabilitate the family name? And he follows Charlie's instructions. Charlie masterminds everything that Jared does, even from jail. Charlie comes up, he's advised by a New York public relations guru, a 3-point plan: sell up in New Jersey, buy a trophy building in New York. So that's point one. Point two is have Jared buy a media outlet, not just so he can control the media, but so that it puts him into the right social networking group. And third, have Jared date someone prominent. And all of these things have come about. But really, it's Charlie pushing all the buttons. When they buy 666 Fifth Avenue with 97% leverage right before the financial crash, nobody thought it was Jared, who was straight out of law school, who was really doing any of this. It was all Charlie. And when the building then had to go through a restructuring, sort of in 2011, Charlie was technically not allowed to have anything to do. It was a condition of the lenders, because he'd gone to jail, he was not allowed to have any involvement in the day-to-day running of this building. So Jared would show up and tell the room during this restructuring that he was putting his lawyer on speakerphone. Well, everyone in the room, none of them had brought their lawyers. They knew exactly what was really going on. It was Charlie being put on speakerphone, and it was Charlie who was calling the shots. And Jared, as he got older, would say to people, well, you really want to do what I say, because if you don't, you're going to have to answer to my father, and he's a lot less pleasant to deal with. They would use each other. So you have to remember the close-knit nature of the relationship, the pressure on Jared to rehabilitate this Charlie Kushner, and that his father is facing this ticking time bomb financially as Jared goes into the White House.
Right. Vicky Ward, we're running out of time here. Real quickly, I'm curious to what extent this, convicted felon and grifter, Charlie Kushner, Jared's dad, is influencing policy in the current White House. To what extent is Charlie driving what Donald Trump is doing?
Well, look, as I say in the book, it was Charlie who asked for $1 billion in the spring of 2017 from the Qatars, this very rich kingdom in the Middle East, who are rivals of Saudi Arabia. Right after that, Jared, make no mistake, we would never have made the first U.S. official visit abroad would never have been to Saudi Arabia if Jared had not pushed it.
Right. We should note, by the way, Qatar is also where. Isn't that where the 5th or 6th Fleet? It's like one of our major naval bases, and it's
major
where
air base.
Yeah,
major air base.
Or air base. Okay, thank you.
And so 10 days after the summit, Rex Tillerson and James Mattis are actually horrified to discover this summit was supposed to be all about cooperation in the Gulf. So 10 days after, the Saudis then lead a blockade of Qatar because they want to overthrow the rulers there and and it's all about money. They want their money. And Rex Tillerson and James Mattis knew, they didn't know, obviously, that Charles Kushner at that moment had asked the Qataris for $1 billion and been turned down. But they did know that the only person in the White House who would have greenlit a blockade of a country where there is an American air base would have been Jared Kushner. And that's when it all became extremely dangerous. And fast forward 9 months, the U.S. withdraws its support for the blockade within a 2-week period of basically a Canadian company whose largest outside shareholder is the Qatar government bailing out the Kushners. And Congress is quite rightly all over this right now, as are other prosecutors, and they should be, because this is going to be the story of the 2020 election.